So I'm here at the Munich Security Conference with Da Wei. He's a professor at Tsinghua University in Beijing and also, one of the regular attendees of the Munich Security Conference that comes with the Chinese delegation here. So Da Wei, we've just seen the back-to-back speeches by Marco Rubio and Wang Yi, the US and Chinese foreign ministers, respectively. We've seen very different visions of the world presented by both. What's your kind of overarching takeaway?
I think the two leaders gave very different, as you said, very different speeches and aiming to sending different messages to the audience. I think from the Marco Rubio parts, what I have heard in this morning's speech is about, I think he's trying to send some reconciliatory message to the European audience because, we know last year J.D. Vance gave a quite harsh speech here, and earlier this year, surrounding Greenland and other issues, Europe have a lot of concern about the U.S. So I think Marco Rubio tried to reassure Europe that Europe and the U.S. are still, one civilization and a lot of historic connections. So he said we are the child of Europe. I think that's for me, very important message. He tried to tell Europe that we are different, but we are still the same family.
And for China, this kind of very, very public falling out between Europe and the United States, which really began here in Munich a year ago with that speech by J.D. Vance, this has been a big opportunity for China, hasn't it?
Theoretically, I will say it is an opportunity. But how to grab this opportunity, I think it's quite difficult. To be honest, I think the split between Europe and the United States is a limited one. And also we have, China and the US and Europe have a lot of differences, particularly, on Ukraine war and also on the economic relationship between the two sides. So I think Europe had problem with the US does not equal to better China-Europe relations. I think it will not be automatically translated into the latter. So, of course, it depends on how Europe and how China interact. I'm happy to see so many European leaders, including Chancellor Merz, will visit China very soon. I think that's a good opportunity for the two sides, try to stabilize and even improve the bilateral relations.
And you pick up on some of the deep problems between Europe and China. Let's go through a couple of them. First of all, the Ukraine war. We heard Wolfgang Ischinger, the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, again trying to get Wang Yi to say that, what China might do to put pressure on the Russians to end this war. Again, Wang Yi dodged the question, said it's basically nothing to do with us. Why is China so reluctant to apply some pressure to the Russian side to say, come on guys, this is enough?
I think it's not China's foreign policy approach to pressure other countries, say, you have to do this, you have to do that. China say, maybe privately, quietly, I think it's better if you do this, if you do that.
Well, could I just interrupt there? Because, China has certainly been, applying an awful lot of pressure to a lot of countries in its neighborhood, whether it's Japan recently about the comments that Prime Minister Takaichi made about Taiwan, whether it's the Philippines, where China has used Coast Guard maritime militia against Philippines fishing vessels in the disputed South China Sea. So I don't think it's the case that China is completely immune to using pressure in international relations.
Those cases you raised, you mentioned, are all the direct bilateral, conflict between those countries and China, like Japan and the Philippines. But as Foreign Minister Wang Yi said, Ukraine war, of course, is a very important issue here, but China is not direct party of the war. We maintain normal trade relations with both Russia and Ukraine. So for us, we think that we can persuade our friend in Russia not to do this. Maybe it's in their interest, but it's really hard to pressure them. And no need to mention Russia is a major country, is a big power. It's really hard if President Trump cannot pressure President Putin to stop. I don't think China can do that.
But maybe I would challenge you on that. I mean, of course, you say that it does not affect China's direct interest, but China is out there in the world saying that it is one of the main countries standing for international law, for instance. Wang Yi referred to this in his speech. Well, one of the biggest and most severe breaches of international law in recent years is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is obvious, very, very clear contravention. You would agree to that, yes? So why would that not be a case where China would believe, okay, it has to talk to the Russians and say, you have to, really take steps to end this? In fact, it goes in the opposite direction, with building up an extremely close relationship with Russia in terms of economics, in terms of business, in terms of supply chains, and also very, very visible diplomatic events such as many, many close meetings, very friendly meetings between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. I mean, that looks like supporting Russia, not constraining Russia.
I think our position is, of course, this war is, influencing everybody, influencing the whole world. China is, of course, is included. But again, China is not direct party in the war. So we are not on the battlefield. And it's true that China maintains close trade relations with Russia. But to be honest, we are also the largest trading partner of Ukraine. So I think, this fact, not be mentioned very frequently here in Europe. Actually, I think Ukrainian side also use a lot of Chinese civilian drone parts to build their parts. So you can also say from that regard, China is also helping Ukraine. But again, it's not being mentioned a lot here.
Still, it's clear that China would like improved relations with Europe. It sees that Europe's view of China has been severely damaged by its relationship with Russia. But still, that is not enough to motivate China to say to the Russians, stop this.
I think it's China believe that China has done we should do. Like China, after 1 year, China launched we have the so-called 12 points of our principle, our positions in this war, including the first point is to point out the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity of all the countries. I think, of course, including Ukraine. But if we are talking about a very, specific mediation effort, I think China, of course, is willing to do that. But I don't think it's, a good chance for China to do it unilaterally or bilaterally with Russia. I think if we can do it together, Europe, U.S., China, or UN, we can do it together. China is very much willing to participate. And now also the U.S. has initiated many, mediation effort, but China was not invited to that. So I think theoretically, China wants to join, but need a proper platform.
Still, as we heard with the repeated questions from Ishinga, and we hear from European governments a lot, they're still very upset about the Chinese position. But let's move on to one of the other issues you mentioned with trade, and particularly a sort of a weaponization of trade, which we've seen in recent times. So China dominates the supply of rare earth minerals that are used in many important kind of tech supply chains, particularly in the clean economy. Last year, we saw China beginning to impose restrictions on those, and these are now seen as a kind of a Damocles over international supply chains that China can use and apply selectively. What is going on here? Is this China kind of learning to use the toolbox of sanctions that the United States has sort of perfected over the years?
The rare earth thing you mentioned, actually, that's an export control. Comprehensively. It's not aiming at any particular country. And more importantly, China did not use it. China just make the rule. And then, of course, including European countries and the US talk to China. China now postpone that. But don't forget the fact that the US, including European countries, has already imposed, that's already happened, high-tech product restriction to China.
So you would see this as a kind of a tit-for-tat situation?
Kinds of tit-for-tat, but again, very importantly, the Western country has already done that on China for years. China has not, and I don't think China is planning to do that to Europe on rare earth. So if sanctioned, I will say it's more or less it's a countermeasure to the United States, but not Europe.
Well, I think, but yeah, and the Chinese have said this to the Europeans repeatedly, but the Europeans see that this is now an established measure that could be used to squeeze them at almost any moment, and the Germans particularly worried about that, that's for sure. Do you see that this kind of move by the Chinese only encourages an effort in the West to decouple their economies from China because they feel they cannot rely on those supplies in the future?
I mean, we are living in a world of weaponization or securitization of economic relationship. This is a fact. I'm very sorry to say that because China has benefited from the globalization very much, but now this world has changed. I mean, we in China has already suffered for a very long time. Like Huawei has been expelled from Europe, and we cannot buy advanced chips. So it's already a fact for China. We have lived in that for 8 years already. You just start that. So I'm sorry to say that, but this is a fact that this is kind of mutual deterrence. Yeah.
And yet, I mean, international digital platforms have been frozen out of China for a very long time. So it's not like the Chinese have never been doing this. You can get TikTok in the West. You cannot get Western social media platforms in China.
Yeah, of course, but we are talking about export control measures. That's a different issue. You are talking about market entry. Market entry, we are also banned from many sectors. For instance, in the United States, we cannot invest. Our apps cannot, run in many countries, like India and others. So this market entry issue, it's different issue, but different countries have different problems in that regard.
And a lot of these tensions run very deep, and Western countries complain that they've been forced into joint ventures in China, which has led to the theft of their international property. So there's intellectual property. So there are all sorts of issues. I want to turn before we finish to one final thing, which is coming up. So Donald Trump is expected to be in Beijing in a couple of months' time, in April. So the next big kind of real international meeting. There's some kind of rumors going around and speculation that Donald Trump might make a conciliatory step with regard to U.S. policy towards Taiwan. That he might make a statement, for instance, that the United States actively opposes Taiwanese independence. This is something the U.S. has not yet said before. Do you anticipate that? Is China hoping for that?
First, I don't know because I'm not in the government. I'm not in the negotiation. But I think it's possible, if not in this visit, but maybe in the future interaction, President Trump, we may, of course, Chinese side will urge the U.S. side to say something positively from our perspective. But I don't know if it will happen, if it will happen this time or next time, because they will have several summits this year. So of course we welcome that, but at the same time, I have to say our expectation is not high. Because first it's difficult. Secondly, U.S. is a very complicated country. So if the president say one thing, the Congress can balance it through an act. So sometimes even worse. So we don't have very high expectation to that. But if they do that, we welcome that.
I mean, this is also a hope that is sort of pegged to Donald Trump being more of an unconventional leader. But for the people on Taiwan who all the polling indicates they do not want to be forced together with China, this is extremely worrying.
Yeah, I mean, the public opinion changes, every, public opinion in different places always changes.
So you think Taiwan is going to become pro-China suddenly?
I mean, of course, in the short term it's impossible, but in the long time, who knows? If you look back 40 years ago, majority of people in Taiwan believe they are Chinese and Taiwan is part of China. So it's changed in past 30 or 40 years. Why can't it change again in next 30, 40 years?
And I mean, in Hong Kong, we've seen a form of sort of re-education taking place there, through the school system, trying to, essentially re-educate an entire population in terms of being pro-China. Is that the sort of thing that Taiwan can anticipate in such a scenario?
I mean, all countries have a kind of, in our national education system, we cultivate patriotism. I think it's same everywhere. If Hong Kong is part of China, Taiwan is part of China. So I think it should be, the education should include, the education of patriotism. I think that's quite natural. So everybody say they are patriotic now, right? The U.S. and in many other countries. So
I think it's going to sound quite concerning, I think, to a lot of people on Taiwan, but we have to finish here. Dawei, thank you very much for speaking to us here on DD.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity.